Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I'm very, very honored and excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Mr. Bruce Pittman. Bruce is the Chief Innovation Officer at SpaceBilt, an aerospace company specializing in in-orbit manufacturing, assembly, and high-performance edge AI compute systems in space. Bruce is truly an aerospace industry veteran with more than 40 years of experience spanning NASA, commercial spaceflight, and high-tech innovation. He began his career with NASA, where he spent 11 years before helping found several pioneering space companies, including SpaceHab and Kistler Aerospace. He has also co-authored two book chapters in Beyond the Earth about the future of humans in space and space commerce. In 2011, NASA awarded Bruce the Exceptional Public Service Medal for exceptional leadership in pioneering the development of commercial space for public benefit. Today, on top of his work at SpaceBilt, he is a chairman of the National Space Society Board of Directors. So, as you can see, Bruce is an incredible leader in the aerospace industry, contributing not only to the commercialization of space, but also educating the next generation of aerospace leaders. So, I'm really excited to learn about Bruce's own journey into this industry. So, welcome, Bruce. Thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, to begin and to kick off, could you share a little bit more about your current role at SpaceBilt and what the company is really focused on right now?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that has been kind of a theme of a majority of my professional life is basically, trying to look for new paradigms. So paradigms are basically a set of rules for how to be successful in a given worldview. And the problem that you get into is no matter how good whatever set of paradigms you're working with, is there's always some questions that it can't answer or doesn't answer very well. And so one of the questions that came up in the aerospace industry was, why is everything cost so much and take so long? And could you speed things up? Could you make things go faster and be cheaper? So, probably the number one paradigm buster um, in this generation is Elon Musk. And he asked that question and he thought he had a better way and he tried to do it. So we're trying to do that same kind of a thing. Of one of the things that we've said is if you look at how space systems are built today, you spend a great deal of time and money and energy and attention trying to one take big complex things and cram them into something that you can fit inside a rocket. And then what you're trying to do is a lot of that time and energy goes to just make it survive the first 10 minutes, which is launch. And you're putting all that time and all that money into uh, an environment that it's only going to see for the first 10 minutes and it's never, ever, ever going to see again. And so we decided that that was stupid. And so what we want to do is launch the components of our systems safely cradled in what we call space foam, just basically space qualified, packing materials to keep from uh, being damaged during launch, and then assemble them on orbit. So the other benefit that you get into there is if you can assemble something in orbit, if you're a little bit smarter about it, you can also disassemble things in orbit, which allows you the opportunity to change things, move things, modify things, expand and contract things, and uh, even repurpose things. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do is to prove out this new paradigm is works for not only rocket launches like the Falcon 9 and the Starship are showing, but also for satellite systems and orbital infrastructure. So that's kind of what we're all about. And we're starting off at the small level with some of the key components. One of the things we're doing now is what we call our large in-space servers. Servers in space has become the cause celeb. We've been doing this for over 6 years now, and we've actually flown some of these things. We actually have one of these on the moon that we've been able to launch. So that we developed. But yeah, it's an exciting time, and it certainly took a lot longer than I thought it would take to get to this point, but we made it. We're here. Exciting things are happening, and I'm really excited.
That's amazing. Thank you for that background. And what do you think is the biggest challenge right now for your company to be able to do this automatic manufacturing, during in space? Is it the robotics aspect, or, I am curious how that more specifically functions. What do you think is the biggest barrier you're trying to overcome right now?
So that's a good question. So in any kind of a startup situation, one of the first things that the big challenges that you run into is money. Cash flow is king. But if you can get around that hurdle, then it's just a matter of the old joke is, don't try to boil the ocean. So what we're trying to focus on is what are the unique things that really need to be custom built, and then what can you take and either commercially available kind of stuff, or stuff that other people have already flown, and can you take that and utilize it? So what we're trying to do here, and so we decided that the compute was one of the areas that we wanted to focus on. Um, and so we are working with Microchip, which is a Silicon Valley company. I guess they're all over the world, all over the country. But NASA is given Microchip $70 million to develop the HPSC. Aerospace loves its acronyms. This is a high performance spaceflight computer. Um, so we're going to be one of the first ones to fly that in space. So right now we're getting ready to try to we've already flown their Polar Fire, and we're going to do an upgraded version of that that we hope to launch in December. And then next year we're going to be flying this HPSC, high performance space computer, along with the NVIDIA Thor chip up to the International Space Station. So that's going to be pretty exciting. It turns out one of the long lead time items right now in space that's kind of a critical path item is solar arrays. So that's another one that turns out that because so many people are trying to do so many things in space right now that it's just really hard to develop solar arrays. So fortunately, there's some new companies that are coming online. There's some new materials rather than silicon. There's some companies that are trying to do Perscovite, which is a new, well, it's not a new material, but it's one that people are taking another look at that had some limitations, but people have seemed to have found ways to do that. So here in Silicon Valley, we went over and visited a company that was ramping up to ramp up an assembly line for Perscovite solar cells here recently. So we're hoping that we can work around that. Um, Turns out robotics isn't a super thing, because there's a number of companies that are doing that. One of the things that we found is trying to find something that's not, if you'll pardon the pun, astronomically expensive, can be a challenge. And then some of the other things is obviously if you want to assemble things in space, the connector that puts these pieces together. And so right now we're looking at a company, a German company called iBoss, and they have a thing called the ISSI, the Integrated Space System Interface. So we actually flew that and demonstrated that on the International Space Station in 2022. So we were excited about that, and so we're going to be flying an upgraded version of that. And so yeah, so there's no unobtainium out there. There's no thing that you really need a big breakthrough to do. It's mostly an integration problem. And as a system engineer, that's the thing that's near and dear to my heart is, how do you make all the pieces fit together and harmonize in a way that's synergistic and not disruptive? So you would like the total to be greater than the sum of the pieces and not less than the sum of the pieces. Um, the other thing I would remind people is that optimum systems are not composed of optimum components. So somebody needs to be making decisions about what do you need to
Mhm.
optimize, and what do you say this is good enough?
That's a really good point. I mean, it's comforting also to hear that we do have some of the really cool technology, and right now it's about putting pieces together and seeing what you can do with all of it. And you brought up a really good point at the beginning, actually, that I wanted to ask more about. I think a lot of people now, I mean, I've been seeing so many different types of manufacturing companies in space, and there seems to be a lot more buzz around, with now SpaceX going IPO, there's a lot more investment, I feel like, going around the space industry, or at least more eyes on the industry overall compared to just a few years ago. So have you found over the 6 years with SpaceBilt a difference in how investors are approaching conversations to investing in the company? Are there less doubts about how this is feasible, or is that kind of like a continuing theme throughout the past 6 years? How have you seen investment changing in this industry and specifically with SpaceBilt?
Um, this is this has been a dynamic kind of situation because when I was with NASA, at the space portal back from 2005 to 2020, right before I joined SpaceBilt. Um, we were trying to encourage this whole private investment and really focused on enabling what's called public-private partnerships. um, and so one of the things that I did as part of that effort, it was actually supported financially by Boeing back in the early days, is we started doing a series of uh, seminars around the country called the Space Investment Summit. And we did probably over a period of 5 or 6 years, we probably did a dozen of these around the country. And
Okay.
and what we were trying to do is one, talk to the investment community and convince them that while it might not be time to be writing checks, it certainly was time to be paying attention and developing the relationships so that when it was time to write the checks, they would be ready. Um, and so that was a really interesting time. So we had like one of the speakers that we had at one of these events. He actually like, spoke at several of ours. Was Steve Jurvetson, who was one of the first people that first VCs to invest in to make an investment in SpaceX. So the first time he came and talked at our meeting, he was explaining why he wasn't investing in space
Okay.
and what was keeping him back. And then after he made the investment in SpaceX, he came back and explained why he did that and what had changed. So it's been an interesting thing to watch since I now have a perspective of almost 20 years of watching this change and how the floodgates kind of opened. And then if you kind of go back like 5 or 6 years, that whole IPO thing, where the people were doing these SPACs, these
Right.
special purpose acquisition companies. And a lot of us kind of knew that this was probably going to happen, where first you can't get any investment, and then
Yeah.
people are throwing money at all kinds of stupid stuff. And so now I think we've come back to a saner kind of a region where
Good.
people are asking better questions. They're doing more due diligence. But the thing that is, and I had this when I was with NASA, and it's still to this day, that people seem to be chasing trends. And
Yeah.
so the one thing I would encourage people to do is, instead of chasing the last trend, why don't you help start the next trend? So look at where this technology is going, look at where all
Right.
this other money is going, and what is that going to enable, and invest in that thing that it's going to be enabled by this new stuff, rather than just being the tail end Charlie that comes along and is trying to, carve out a market niche, in a thing that's way
Right.
overpopulated. And, orbital launch has to be one of those things. I mean, at
Right.
one point, there was like 150 companies that were being funded to one level or another to go pursue this in a market that can maybe, 3 to 5, people are going to
Right.
survive in that. And like I said, when I was with NASA, they would come through and they were all explaining why theirs was going to be the one that was going to survive. And so I would
Mhm.
all ask them, well, how are you different from the other 30 people that have come through that door that have told me the same story. And
Right.
as one of my old bosses once said, hope is not a strategy. So just because you hope that
Right.
people see how much better that you are,
Right.
you need a little bit more than that. So I think now is a good time, that people are not. It's not as easy to raise money as it was in 2021 or 2022, but I think that it's better money because what you really need in the space business is you not only need money, you need pretty big money. So this isn't like a software startup where somebody puts in, $1 to $2 million, and in 24 to 36 months you have an app out there, and they
Yeah.
get 100x their money back. So one is you need bigger money, and
Yeah.
you need patient money. So space is complex. Space is hard. Just getting to space is hard, and then once you're trying to do that to establish a thing, so that's one of the things. You need a specific kind of money that's has both deep pockets and is patient. And then the other thing that we found is, again, going back to this public-private partnership, trying to work out a deal with the to for dual use technology that has commercial applications, but that
Right.
also you can have the government as a market. And we've been very fortunate to have developed a couple of different partnerships
Yeah.
with the Defense Innovation Unit here in Silicon Valley to help us demonstrate some of these kinds of dual use technologies. So the thing that I talked about, flying the ISSI to the International Space Station, that was something that the Defense Innovation Unit helped us fund that experiment to back in 2022, and is continuing to support us in some of the developments of what we're trying to do now.
Wow, yeah, no, that's really definitely interesting to hear what you said. And I kept thinking back, of similar trends in different industries. Like I see kind of people right now, I mean, being right now in California, so many people working obviously in AI and they're developing very similar tools. And I see like 20 companies working on the exact same problem. And like you said, sometimes it's about not just being a follower, but figuring out what you could do with that technology and where you can start a new trend. And also with the huge capital that goes into space, I'm currently like looking into med tech, and that's something I've noticed when you're trying to innovate for healthcare, there's a huge, upfront investment that needs to be made in order to get all the trials and proof of concept before even integrating into hospitals and making any money. So I can definitely see some parallels with different industries, but like you said, I think it's hard, but I'm glad people are still investing in space right now in a smart way. And so I am curious, you mentioned you've really seen commercialization change so much in the past few decades throughout your career. Was SpaceX the moment, do you think, when they started doing they went really big, that the industry became more commercialized? Or was there another moment that you think changed the industry to go from being NASA, NASA, NASA to now looking at all these private companies as a way of getting faster into space?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I'm a little bit prejudiced because one of the programs that we helped start was 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 something that had come out of my experience with one working with NASA, and trying to do new things, and the early days of the space station. But then the lessons learned when we did Space Hab and trying to fly human rated hardware on the space shuttle in the
Yeah.
cargo bay. And so it was one of those kinds of things that, kind of like going back to you know uh, these are the best of times, these are the worst of times. Um, that so there was a lot of painful lessons that were learned. So when I was at the space portal in the early days, after the because one of the pivotal things was the uh, the Columbia accident, in
Yeah.
2003, where we lost the space shuttle Columbia
Yeah.
on reentry. And then before that, there was some key legislation that was passed in the late 90s that basically removed a lot of the barriers to commercial space. And it was really those two things that led to
Mm.
was called the COTS program, this Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, and that was actually something that our office had participated in. Kind of we birthed that in the early days, and then worked with the Johnson Space Center on the actual implementation of that. And this was the first big money public-private
Hmm.
partnership where that got Elon his first $276 million for SpaceX. And this was really a big bet
Yeah,
that Mike Griffin made that these companies could really deliver. But um, and it was not without some nail biting and
yeah,
some a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on a lot of people. Like one of the first companies that was awarded was one of the companies that I had helped start. It had gone through bankruptcy since then, but Rocket Plane Kistler won one of the initial COTS awards. But then in the 2007 timeframe, which is when we had uh, for those of you that are old enough, not old enough to remember back then, that was when we had a really big, economic downturn, where the whole financial markets melted down. And so they had a big financial raise that they needed to do to meet their Space Act agreements, and they couldn't do it. So they needed to raise 400 million, and they were not able to do that. So NASA, canceled that Space Act agreement and recompeted the rest of the money, and Orbital Sciences won. And both of those companies were able to demonstrate the ability to deliver cargo to the International Space Station pretty much on schedule. They both had a few hiccups along the way, but I would say all in all, it was pretty successful. And then after the cargo part, there was also the crew part. So I think those were some key milestones that gave a lot of uh, more confidence that one, the government could be a good partner, a reliable partner going forward. And then two, that these companies, it wasn't just the big prime aerospace companies. Some of these other smaller, more nimble companies proved that they could actually step up. And um, going from the Falcon 1, where
right.
Elon was one launch failure away from oblivion with the fourth launch of the Falcon 1, to now IPO as the most
Yeah,
successful IPO in the history of the world.
yeah.
It's just been an amazing thing to watch over those 20 years.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I mean, I really can see how you are so excited for this space and just seeing the evolution of not only the commercialization aspect of space, but how far we've come as an industry. And obviously, right now, I think there's so many eyes, which is a great thing to continue growing in this space. Um, but I am wondering kind of what was your aha moment that inspired you to come into this industry? Was it, did you always know when you were a little kid, or was there a particular class or mentor? I'm curious, what was your journey into space?
It was actually science fiction. Um, when I was like in fourth grade, I came across these series of books called Tom Corbett's Space Cadet, and it was about this cadet at this was called the Solar Guard Academy, and zooming around the solar system in a rocket ship and all that. And I just thought that was so cool. And then when I was in high school, I joined the Civil Air Patrol, which was an auxiliary of the Air Force. So I got a lot of education in aerospace and all that. So um, and then when I went to college, I went into engineering because I figured that was the easiest way to get a career. And then uh, it occurred to me when I was like at the end of my sophomore year that although I was signed up to be an aerospace engineer, it occurred to me that I had never actually talked to one. And so I decided I wanted to do that. So I came across a thing on the bulletin board at school um, that they had this thing called co-op programs, these
Okay.
cooperative education
Right.
programs. And so there was all kinds of different companies that you could do, and one of them was NASA Ames. So I signed up for a bunch of these things and then send in my application, and I didn't hear anything. So I thought, I, just kind of blew it off. And then right before Christmas, one year, many years ago, the NASA Ames people called me up and said, "Hey, we'd like you to come talk to us." So I was at UC Davis, and which is about 2 hours away from
Right.
NASA Ames. So I hopped in my little Volkswagen and went over the hill, and sure enough, they were gave me so again, I had originally just wanted an interview, but they actually offered me a job, and it wasn't just a part-time job; it was like a full-time job because as part of this, you actually go and you leave school and you actually go work
Right.
full-time at NASA, and then you go back to school. But for the second half of my the beginning of my junior year to my graduation, I actually worked at NASA Ames for 15 months full time, which really worked out great for me because I don't know about if it's changed and gotten better, but I just thought school was pretty boring. And I wasn't quite sure initially what being an engineer was all about, but I was pretty sure it wasn't, read the chapter and then do all the problems at the back. So what I found, but when I got to work there, is I found out while I didn't really like being an engineering student, I really liked being an engineer because they actually treated you like you were a real full-fledged engineer and not just a gopher. I actually got to do research and I had a laboratory and
Wow.
all that. So it was a great experience for me, and that really helped me a lot to just grit my teeth and get through it. And then they uh, they were making no promises about having a job after you graduated, but it turns out when they did, so I was one of the implant people at Hughes Aircraft Company as a NASA rep on Pioneer Venus. So here I was, 24 years old, and I was getting to send a spacecraft to another planet, and I was thinking, holy moly, doesn't get any better than this. So it was a great experience.
That's
So,
incredible.
but part of it
Yeah.
is just luck, being in the
Yeah.
right place at the right time.
Yeah, definitely. I think serendipity is so true and so real. And I could relate to many parts of your story as well. And I've seen similarities in other people's stories where it's usually a movie or a book that really gets them excited about space initially and like the possibilities of it. I remember when I was young, I watched The Martian and I thought it was the coolest thing to go to a different planet, to go to Mars and, to live there and the possibility of that. And I think film has such a big power of it, and we've noticed that throughout the years. So I think more new space movies need to be made, and we need to, actually, someone was saying Frank White. He was the founder of the Overview Effect, and I was having a conversation with him, and he actually said we need to have a new version of the Star Trek for this generation, so we can kind of recreate the new generation of like aerospace explorers, because I think that
Yeah.
inspired so many people. But also, what you were thing about your journey at NASA Ames, actually, my first internship was at NASA Ames at the Gene Lab Center, where I got
Hmm.
into space biology. And I didn't even know you could do anything in aerospace medicine or what space biology was. But that was a defining moment in my career. So I'm so glad opportunities like that exist. And we can hopefully do a better job of getting students into that aerospace pipeline because it's such an interdisciplinary career. And so, in your career, kind of navigating and going through NASA and, then kind of going into commercialization of space, it seems somewhat of a linear journey, but I'm sure it was never like that for you when you were going through it. So I'm curious, coming from an internal perspective, from your perspective, what were some of the challenges or obstacles you had to overcome, and how did you approach those situations in your life? Because many of our listeners are young, and I think life will put upon you, it's not linear. There will be so many different challenges and we have to overcome those. So I'm curious, what were some of those moments for you and how did you overcome them?
Well, where do you start? Um, one thing you left out of my thing is I worked as an adjunct lecturer in the graduate engineering school at Santa Clara many years after I got my master's there, and so I would talk to the students there, and so I came up with these things that were called Pittman's postulates. These are little heuristics, little sayings that you know. Uh, that you can't prove that, but I found to be useful, and so one of the things I would tell my students is, you know, whenever you're trying to do something, and this sounds really pessimistic, but unfortunately it's not, is if you're trying to come up with budgets and schedules, take your best guess at what the budget and schedule it is, and then multiply by pi. Um, because everything takes longer and costs more than it should, or it could, or it would, or whatever. So
Right.
it's just, that's really frustrating because you could see how it could go, and then but never things never quite go the way that we want. So one of the things I ended up teaching was basically risk management. How can we do a better job of trying to be proactive about risk rather than reactive about risk. So that's one of the things that I would say. The other part is you need to look at opportunities as well, because one of the things that you find is one of the reasons a lot of people miss opportunities or are not in a position to take full advantage of them is they just weren't prepared for them. So that you not only have to look at the downside of what if things go bad, but you also have to look at the upside. What if things go well? And am I in a position to take advantage of it? So if it's raining pennies from heaven, but you don't have a bucket,
Right.
it doesn't do you a whole lot of good because they'll just slip through your fingers here. So one is keeping, and then the other part of this is keeping your eye on the big picture. Because what a lot of people will do is they'll get so focused that not only this is what I want to do, but this is the way I want to do it. And often you're running into a brick wall where what you find out is if you kept your eyes open, you'd find out, well, that door is closed, but this window is open. And so what if I just go through here or down this alley and in the back door, is that a better way? Is that a better way to do things? So the way we used to say this at NASA is you want to keep your eye on the prize, you want to keep an eye on the goal, but you want to be a little bit flexible about how you get there and take the feedback that the universe is giving you, um, both good and bad, and keep your head on the swivel. Keep looking around for, if this door doesn't look like it's not working, do I just double down and keep trying that, or is there another approach that I should take? So that it took me a while to learn that one.
Yeah, yeah, no, I appreciate hearing that because as someone who is just out of college recently, I think sometimes it could feel like, oh, I have this one path, this is what I majored in, this is what I've got to do. And I'm starting to, hearing so many different journeys, it's like internalize that it's never one path. Like yes, you might have a long-term goal, but there's so many ways of doing that, and you don't have to be super one-tracked about it. And I think that's something I struggle with. So I think it's helpful to hear that from someone who's been through it and is now doing very well. So just being more open to opportunities that are around you, even though it's harder at the moment to digest that, if that makes sense.
Although I went through to become an aerospace engineer very intentionally, when that came that first time after college, when I graduated to get the full-time job with NASA, it wasn't as an aerospace engineer. It was that they needed a double E. So I had to kind of convince them that I was almost a double E, even though I could not hardly spell this and all that. So it was a little bit of a thing. One is I had proved that I was pretty flexible, and two, they were kind of desperate to get somebody, because none of the experienced double E's that they wanted to get to go, nobody wanted to move from the Bay Area down to LA. And so I'm going, hey, send me, and I
Yeah,
graduated on a Thursday and I was in LA the next Monday, at work.
yeah,
So sometimes just being flexible like that, of
right,
yes, I will relocate,
right. Yeah.
was part of the thing that got me the job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually recently, 2 days ago, I heard this exact advice where someone was saying, why not say, why not? If there's an opportunity that comes to you, just say, why not? Instead of being so worried about, hey, can I do this? Or how is it going to be to live in a new place? Or, that jump you made. Clearly, you're a risk taker and you're someone who just chases after opportunities. And I think that's a really good mindset to have, even though it can be scary, just to say, why not? And just doing it. I think sometimes is the skill we all need to kind of just get comfortable saying. So I definitely agree with that. And if you could go, the last question I have for you now that we were able to learn a little bit about your work, your journey, as well as what got you here today. I am curious. I asked this to every single person who I've interviewed is if you could go back in time, maybe in your early 20s or right when you got out of college, if you could give yourself a piece of advice that you wanted to hear or that you should have heard at that time, what would that advice be?
Hmm, it's a good question. Um, I guess it would um, be a little more humble. Um, because I was pretty type A back then, and I was kind of, I guess the word I would use was cocky. Um, and so I didn't challenge my assumptions enough, and I was very clear what was right and what was wrong. And what I've come to find out since then is the world is not black and white. It is full of infinite shades of gray. And I was trying to simplify things. And this, we all have kind of built-in biases. And I really did not challenge mine enough. And it took some um, painful uh, you know lessons to learn that to be to learn to ask better questions and to not see everything as black and white.
Right.
Um, the other piece of advice I wanted to give was going back to the previous thing about going into new things is one of the things that people need to I think determine is how comfortable are you with a steep learning curve? Because some people, because to me, that's what allowed me to do what I did, is because I enjoyed that always doing something new and being on the kind of bleeding edge. So I think one of the questions that people need to ask themselves, are they comfortable with that? Because not everybody is meant to just jump in and with both feet and see if they can swim. Some people are more, because I had some of my college roommates that when I told them I was going to take a job as a double E, when I graduated from NASA, they thought I was crazy. Well, what if it doesn't work out? What if you don't do this? And I said, if they're stupid enough to give me the job, I'm stupid enough to take it. But it was because I knew that about myself. So that was one other piece of advice I would get. But uh, yeah, just don't be so sure you're right, I guess would be, and be open to other ideas. Um, the other thing I would say is develop networks of people that you know and trust. And because I made some really big decisions and jumped into some things without really talking to anybody. And I look back at it and think of what what were you not thinking then that made that seem like a good idea? So get a trusted network of people and
Right.
advisors and mentors that you can talk to and just say, does this seem like a good idea to you? Now, you don't always want to take the feedback, but at least you should solicit it and consider it.
Mhm.
So that would be my other piece of advice.
Definitely. Yeah. And I guess just one follow-up. I know I said that was the last question, but I mean, I feel like sometimes this is on the mind of a lot of young people. I think if you're coming into a certain industry where you might not know a lot of people or you're trying to look for mentors, it can be difficult to figure out how to ask someone for their time. I think it's difficult when you don't have a personal relationship already to develop one with someone or to see if would be willing to be a mentor. So I'm curious, how would you recommend someone who is young to look for a mentor or to ask in an appropriate way, hey, could you be my mentor? I think, I don't know if that's just me, but I've talked with a few of my friends, and sometimes it can be difficult to ask someone to take away their time because they're so
Yeah.
busy to just give advice. So, as someone who is in those shoes of being a mentor, what advice would you give for younger students to seek out mentors?
So one of the things I would always recommend that people do is look at professional societies. Whether if you're an engineer or almost all major disciplines have some kind of a thing. For me, it was the AIAA, the
Right.
American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. So I was the chapter president at Davis of that organization, And it just gives you a couple of things. One is it lets you talk to people that are professionals in that, because almost always, and then those people that belong to those societies are much more likely to be open to doing this than just going up to some average person and ask them, "Hey, would you mentor me?" And then the other part of this it gives you a chance to do is to show what you're capable of. It gives you a chance to be a leadership, show your leadership abilities in a kind of a non-threatening way, that sometimes easier than it is part of your professional job. Like I remember one of the first things that I did with the AIAA was I put on a conference. And so that's a great learning experience for organizing people and communicating and planning and all that. So there's certain things like that. So that's one thing that I do. It's usually reasonably inexpensive. And I think there's a lot of benefits to it. And then keep those relationships, that even when you move on and you graduate and all that, spend the time to nurture those relationships, especially the people that you really resonate with, or that um, you like hanging out with, or interacting with. I found it to be very beneficial. And again, that's another thing that I wish I had done a better job of.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I will definitely keep that in mind, and I'm sure everyone who's listening will as well. So, yeah, thank you
And,
so
and
much
let me
for
give a plug for the National Space Society. That's
yes.
another organization that I think does a good job of that. We have a lot of high tech and aerospace professionals in that organization. And so I would encourage you folks. We do a lot of competitions, and stuff like that. That's another thing that we do. We have, hundreds, uh, thousands of students that actually participate from around the world in some of these competitions. And that's another great way to try out some of these things, is to do it. And there are some prizes and some honors and things like that. So anyway, so
Yeah,
take a
no,
look.
definitely. Yeah, I feel like everyone who's into the aerospace field will hear about National Space Society at some point throughout their journey. So definitely we'll keep that in mind. But I just want to thank you so much, Bruce, for taking your time to not only talk about this whole new world of space manufacturing and what's happening in it and SpaceBilt, but also your own personal career journey. I think it can be intimidating sometimes for young students who are trying to navigate their career to figure out what they could look like in 20, 30 years. But to hear it from someone who's been through that journey and kind of learning about what they did and how they also came from maybe a similar origin story of, reading a book or watching a movie that excited them about space. So it was very comforting to hear. So I just want to thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.